The gavel came down like a sentence in the boardroom of Nova Dynamics, and Presley Harrington felt the floor drop out from under her polished heels. 15 minutes earlier she had walked in as the youngest CEO in the company's history, a woman who had built a fintech empire from a garage startup. Now she was being asked to sign her own resignation in front of 8 stone-faced shareholders who could not look her in the eye. The reason hung in the air thicker than the scent of expensive coffee. No one had touched the leaked photos from her wedding to Ivy 2 weeks ago in a quiet Napa vineyard, had finally made the rounds, and the board had decided that a lesbian CEO was a liability they could no longer afford. She stared at the document, her name already printed in crisp black ink, and for the first time in her 35 years Presley felt the weight of every choice that had led her here, the late nights, the sacrificed weekends, the carefully hidden relationship that had finally demanded to be seen. She signed without reading the fine print because fighting would only prolong the humiliation, and when she stood the room stayed silent except for the soft click of her heels on marble as she walked out. In the elevator she pulled out her phone and dialed the one person who had promised to stand beside her no matter what. Ivy answered on the first ring, her voice steady and warm the way it always was after a long day in court. "Baby, what's wrong? You sound like you've seen a ghost." Presley leaned against the mirrored wall watching the floors count down and whispered the words that changed everything. "They forced me out, Ivy. Because of us. Because I married you." The line went quiet for 2 heartbeats, then Ivy said, "I'm coming to you right now. Do not drive, stay in the lobby. I will be there in 20 minutes. Presley stepped into the cool San Francisco fog and waited on the wide stone steps of the building she had once owned in every meaningful way. Passers-by glanced at her, the woman in the charcoal suit who looked like she had just lost a war, but she kept her chin up the way her father had taught her, even when the lesson had come with a side of "you need to act normal if you want to succeed in this world." Her phone buzzed again, this time her mother's number from the family estate in Marin County. She let it ring until voicemail picked up, then listened to the message that followed. "Presley, and this is your mother. We saw the news. Your father is beside himself. Call us immediately. We need to discuss how to fix this mess before it ruins the family name." She deleted it without replying and slipped the phone back into her bag as Ivy's black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Ivy stepped out in the tailored navy suit that always made Presley catch her breath, and for a moment the two women simply looked at each other across the space of the sidewalk. Ivy crossed the distance and pulled her into a hug right there in public, the kind of public display they had avoided for years out of caution. "I am so sorry, baby," she murmured into Presley's hair. "We knew this could happen, but not like this, not this fast." Presley clung to her, the scent of Ivy's perfume grounding her in the middle of the storm. They drove home in silence through the city streets that suddenly felt hostile, every billboard, every newsstand headline screaming about the fallen CEO and her surprise wife. When they reached their loft in Pacific Heights, Ivy poured 2 glasses of Cabernet, and they sat on the leather couch that had witnessed so many late-night strategy sessions. Presley finally spoke the words that had been burning inside her since the gavel fell. "I gave them everything, Ivy. 12 years of my life building that company from nothing, and they threw me away because I dared to love you openly." Ivy set her glass down, her lawyer eyes sharpening. "We are not done fighting. I still have access as your wife, and as outside counsel I can review the bylaws, see if there is any leverage." Presley shook her head slowly, the exhaustion settling into her bones. "What is the point if the whole world thinks I am a distraction now? My own father texted me that I should have kept it quiet, like he kept his affairs quiet for 30 years. The hypocrisy of it all made her laugh, a bitter sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Ivy reached for her hand, threading their fingers together, the simple gold bands they had exchanged in Napa catching the light from the city outside. "We chose this, Presley. We chose each other knowing the cost. The question is whether we are willing to pay it all the way." They talked until the wine was gone and the city lights blurred into dawn. Presley finally fell asleep on the couch, her head in Ivy's lap, while Ivy stared at the ceiling, replaying every clause in every contract she had ever drafted for Nova Dynamics. Something in the back of her mind, a small irregularity she had noticed months ago during a routine audit, began to surface, but she pushed it down for now, focusing instead on the steady rise and fall of her wife's breathing. By morning the news had exploded across every business site and social feed, and Presley's phone would not stop vibrating with messages from former allies who now distanced themselves with careful wording. She ignored them all and made coffee while Ivy showered. When Ivy emerged dressed for battle in a crisp white blouse, Presley felt a flicker of hope. "We face this together," she said. But Ivy only nodded, her expression unreadable. as she checked her own phone one last time before slipping it into her briefcase. Together, she echoed, but the word carried a weight Presley could not yet name. They left the loft arm in arm, stepping into a world that had already decided their love was a liability worth destroying. The drive back downtown felt like marching into a second battlefield, and when they arrived at the temporary office space Presley had arranged, Ivy kissed her cheek and said, "I will handle the legal side, you focus on damage control with the team." Presley watched her wife disappear into the elevator, and for the first time wondered if handling the legal side meant something more than she had admitted. The next 24 hours would prove her right in the most devastating way possible. The temporary office smelled of fresh paint and desperation. Presley stood at the window overlooking the financial district, watching tourists snap photos of the Transamerica Pyramid, while her remaining loyal staff tried to pretend the company was not in free fall. She had spent the morning on damage control calls explaining that her departure was mutual, and that Nova Dynamics remained stronger than ever, but the stock had already dropped 8%, and 3 major clients had emailed to pause their contracts pending review. Each conversation chipped away at the armor she had built over a decade until she felt raw and exposed in a way no boardroom battle had ever managed. Her assistant Sarah, a sharp-eyed woman who had been with her since the early days, brought in a fresh stack of printed headlines and set them on the desk without comment. The top one read, "Tech Titan toppled by wedding photos," and Presley pushed them aside, refusing to let the words sink in. Instead, she opened her laptop and began drafting an internal memo that would reassure the 200 employees who depended on her vision. The words came slowly, each sentence a negotiation between honesty and the need to keep the ship afloat. When she finally hit send, the replies flooded in, some supportive, some cautious, and a few brutally honest about the whispers in the break room. She closed the laptop and rested her forehead against the cool glass, letting the city noise blur into white sound. Ivy arrived just after noon carrying takeout from their favorite Thai place, and the 2 women ate in silence at the small conference table. Ivy had spent the morning at her own firm reviewing the shareholder agreement, and the look on her face said the news was not good. "They are within their rights, Presley," she said, finally pushing her plate away. "The morality clause in your contract is broad enough that any conduct they deem detrimental to the brand can trigger removal. And right now the brand is taking a hit from conservative investors who pulled out overnight." Presley stabbed at a piece of chicken, the fork scraping loudly against the container. "So my marriage is detrimental. My happiness is detrimental." Ivy reached across the table, covering her hand. "Your happiness is everything to me, but we are playing in a world that still punishes women for living authentically. I have seen it in courtrooms for years." That afternoon, Presley's father called again, this time on the office line, so she could not ignore it. His voice boomed through the speaker, the same commanding tone that had built a real estate empire in the Bay Area. "You have embarrassed this family, Presley. Your mother cannot show her face at the club. I warned you about this lifestyle years ago when you brought that girl home from college. If you had listened, none of this would be happening." Presley gripped the edge of the desk until her knuckles whitened. "Dad, I am 35 years old. I built a company worth $500 million. And all you care about is how it looks at the club." The line crackled with his sigh. "I care about your future. Come home tonight, we will figure out a way to spin this, maybe a separation announcement, something to calm the waters." She hung up before he could finish the sentence, and when she turned, Ivy was standing in the doorway, her expression soft with understanding. They left early that evening, driving across the Golden Gate Bridge with the windows down, letting the salt air clear their heads. At home, Ivy lit candles and they sat on the balcony wrapped in a single blanket, watching the sun set over the bay. Presley rested her head on Ivy's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of her heart. "Remember when we first met?" she asked quietly. Ivy smiled into the twilight. "How could I forget? You were the keynote speaker at that legal tech conference in Chicago, and I was the junior associate who spilled coffee all over your presentation notes. You laughed instead of getting angry, and that was it for me." Presley closed her eyes, recalling the moment, the spark that had grown into something neither of them could deny despite the risks. They had kept it secret for 3 years, meeting in different cities, stealing weekends, and always careful never to appear together in public. Until the night in Napa when Ivy had proposed under a string of lights and Presley had said yes without hesitation. The memory brought a fresh wave of pain because that yes had cost her everything she had worked for. Ivy sensed the shift and pulled her closer. "We knew the world would not celebrate us the way we celebrate each other. But I would say yes again in a heartbeat." Presley turned to face her, tracing the line of Ivy's jaw with her fingertip. Even if it means losing the company. Even if it means losing me. Ivy's eyes darkened with something unreadable. You will never lose me. That is the one thing I can promise. They went inside and made love without urgency, just the quiet reaffirmation of bodies and hearts that had chosen each other against every odd. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets, Presley whispered the fear that had been growing all day. What if they come after you next? What if your firm decides representing me is too risky? Ivy kissed her forehead and said, then I will find another way to fight. I always do. The next morning brought the first real blow. An email from the board informed Presley that all company accounts were under review, and that her access had been temporarily suspended pending the transition. She stared at the screen, the words blurring as anger rose hot and sharp. Ivy was already at the kitchen island reviewing documents, her laptop open to a spreadsheet Presley did not recognize. When Presley showed her the email, Ivy nodded slowly, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. I expected this. It is standard procedure. But her voice lacked conviction, and when Presley pressed her, Ivy admitted there was more. I noticed something during the audit last quarter. Some of the board members have been moving funds in ways that do not add up. Nothing illegal on the surface, but enough to make me wonder if the ousting was about more than your marriage. Presley felt the ground shift again. So they used me as the scapegoat. Ivy closed the laptop and stood, pulling Presley into her arms. Maybe. But I am not going to let them win. They spent the day drafting a press release together, Ivy editing with the precision of a courtroom warrior, while Presley added the personal touch that would humanize the story. By evening the release was ready, and they sent it out together, watching the notifications light up their phones as journalists began to call. Presley answered none of them, choosing instead to cook dinner with Ivy, chopping vegetables side by side in the small kitchen that had become their sanctuary. Over pasta and more wine they talked about the future, what life without Nova Dynamics could look like, maybe starting something new together, maybe traveling the world. The conversation felt like healing until Presley's phone rang with an unknown number, and when she answered, the voice on the other end introduced himself as a reporter from the Chronicle, wanting a comment on rumors that her wife had been involved in the financial review that led to the resignation. Presley hung up stunned and turned to Ivy, whose face had gone pale. What rumors? Ivy set her fork down carefully. I may have asked a few questions at the firm today. Nothing that should have leaked. But the board has friends everywhere. Presley felt the first crack in the trust they had built. You went behind my back. Ivy reached for her, but Presley stepped back. I was trying to protect you. The conversation escalated into the first real argument of their marriage, voices rising with accusations and defenses until both women were exhausted and sorry. They went to bed back to back, the space between them small but suddenly vast. Presley lay awake listening to Ivy's breathing, wondering how quickly love could become a battlefield. The following morning she woke to an empty bed and a note on the counter. Gone to the office to fix this. Love you always. Presley crumpled the note and drove to the temporary space alone, only to find the doors locked, and a security guard informing her that access had been revoked completely. She stood on the sidewalk, the fog rolling in thick and cold, mirroring the uncertainty in her chest. When her phone buzzed with a text from Ivy saying, "Meet me at home, we need to talk," her stomach dropped. The 24-hour mark was approaching and something in the air felt final. She drove home faster than she should have, the city blurring past as fear and love collided inside her. When she walked through the door, Ivy was waiting in the living room, tablet in hand, and the look on her face said the next words would change everything forever. Ivy stood in the center of their living room, the tablet glowing with rows of numbers that meant nothing to Presley at first glance. The freeze is already in motion, she said quietly, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. Every Nova Dynamics account is locked, effective immediately. Presley felt the words hit like a physical blow, and she grabbed the back of the couch to steady herself. You did this. You froze my company. Our company. Ivy set the tablet down and crossed her arms, the lawyer stance that always signaled she was prepared for battle. It is not your company anymore, Presley. The board made sure of that. But I could not let them loot it on the way out. There are irregularities, transfers to shell accounts that point straight to 3 board members who pushed hardest for your removal. I used my access as your spouse and as counsel to protect the assets until an independent audit can happen. Presley laughed, a short, harsh sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Protect? You mean control? You went behind my back and now the entire company is paralyzed. Employees will not get paid, vendors will walk away, and the press will have a field day. Ivy stepped closer, her expression softening just a fraction. I did it for you. For us. If they had gotten their hands on those funds, we would have lost any chance of fighting back in court. This buys us time. Presley turned away, staring out the window at the bay where sailboats moved lazily, as if the world had not just tilted on its axis. Time for what exactly? To watch everything I built crumble while you play hero. The accusation hung between them, heavy and unfair, and Ivy flinched but did not retreat. They spent the next hour in the kind of raw conversation that strips away pretense. Presley admitted the fear that had haunted her since the wedding, that her love for Ivy had cost her identity as a leader. Ivy confessed the nights she had lain awake wondering if she was enough for a woman whose ambition had always come first. They cried and held each other, and somewhere in the middle of the tears Presley realized the freeze was not betrayal, but the ultimate act of loyalty from a woman who had watched her wife sacrifice everything. Still, the practical fallout was immediate. By afternoon, the news broke that Nova Dynamics accounts were frozen pending investigation, and the stock plunged another 12%. Presley's phone became a weapon of mass notification, with calls from panicked employees, from furious investors, and from her mother, who left a voicemail demanding she fix this disaster before the family trust was affected. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah arrived at the loft unannounced, carrying a box of Presley's personal files from the office. The board is cleaning house, she said, handing over the box. They want no trace of you left. Presley hugged her tightly, the gesture saying more than words could. Sarah had been more than an assistant, she had been a confidant who had known about the relationship from the beginning, and had kept the secret without question. After Sarah left, Presley and Ivy sat on the floor, surrounded by papers, sorting through years of contracts and emails. They found the first piece of evidence, a series of messages between board members discussing how Presley's marriage provided the perfect excuse to install a new CEO more aligned with their vision. The discovery felt like both vindication and fresh wound. That evening they ordered pizza and ate it cold while reviewing the evidence, Ivy marking potential violations with her precise handwriting. Presley watched her wife work the concentration on her face, the same one that had first drawn her in at that Chicago conference. Do you remember the night we almost got caught, she asked, breaking the silence. Ivy looked up, a small smile breaking through. The hotel in Austin, when the fire alarm went off and we had to run down 12 flights in bathrobes. Presley nodded, the memory bringing a lightness they both needed. We laughed so hard we could barely breathe. That is the us I want to protect, Ivy. Not the company, not the money. Ivy set the papers aside and pulled Presley into her lap. Then we fight for us. But we do it smart. No more secrets. The promise felt fragile because secrets had been their survival mechanism for years. Presley's family had never accepted the relationship, viewing it as a phase that would pass once the right man appeared. Iva's own mother, a retired judge, had warned her that marrying a high-profile CEO would invite scrutiny that could derail her own career. Both women had paid the price in quiet ways: canceled family holidays, strained holidays, and the constant weight of living half in shadow. Now the shadows were gone and the light was blinding. They went to bed early that night, holding each other as if the world outside might steal one of them away. Presley woke at 3 a.m. to find Ivy at the kitchen table, still working her laptop, casting a blue glow across her face. She joined her, pouring 2 glasses of water, and they sat together in the quiet hours, reviewing numbers until the sun rose, painting the bay in gold. By mid-morning, the independent auditor Ivy had quietly engaged confirmed the irregularities and filed the necessary reports with the SEC. The board issued a statement calling the freeze an illegal overreach and threatening legal action against both women. Presley read the statement aloud, her voice shaking with rage. They are painting us as the villains. Ivy squeezed her hand. Let them. The truth has a way of surfacing when you force the light in. The rest of the day became a blur of strategy sessions with Iva's colleagues, who had agreed to take the case pro bono out of respect for her reputation. Presley contributed what she could, her intimate knowledge of the company proving invaluable. In the late afternoon they faced their first joint press conference on the steps of Iva's firm, and when a reporter asked if the marriage had been a mistake, Presley looked straight into the camera and said, "Loving my wife is the best decision I have ever made." The clip went viral within minutes, and for the first time the narrative began to shift from scandal to solidarity. Yet the personal cost mounted. Presley's father cut off contact completely, sending a terse email that the family trust would be revised to exclude her. Her mother sent a single text filled with disappointment that cut deeper than any boardroom slight. Ivy received notice from her firm that partners were questioning her judgment, and that a review of her cases was underway. Through it all they leaned on each other, finding strength in the small rituals, coffee in the morning, walks along the waterfront, and the quiet affirmations whispered in the dark. The 24-hour window had closed, but the war had only just begun, and in the eye of the storm Presley realized that the woman beside her was not just her wife but her equal partner in every battle that mattered. The SEC investigators arrived at the loft unannounced 2 days after the freeze, carrying badges and questions that stretched into the evening. Presley answered them with the calm she had perfected in 1,000 board meetings, while Ivy sat beside her providing legal counsel, without ever crossing the line into interference. The agents left with boxes of documents and a promise to return, and when the door closed Presley turned to Ivy, the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "How much more of this can we take?" Ivy pulled her close, resting her chin on top of Presley's head. "As much as it takes. Because on the other side is the life we chose." They ordered Chinese food and ate it straight from the cartons, watching old episodes of a sitcom that had nothing to do with finance or family or prejudice. For 2 hours they laughed like normal people, and the respite felt like oxygen after days underwater. The following morning brought a new betrayal. Sarah called in tears to say that the board had offered her a promotion in exchange for any dirt she might have on Presley and Ivy. She had refused, but the offer had shaken her, and Presley spent an hour on the phone reassuring her that loyalty mattered more than any title. When she hung up, Ivy was waiting with fresh coffee and the latest update from the auditor. The shell companies trace back to a single offshore account controlled by the chairman himself. If we can prove it, the entire board could face charges. Presley felt a surge of vindication mixed with sorrow because the company she had loved like a child was now a crime scene. They spent the day building the case, Ivy drafting motions while Presley provided context from years of meetings where the chairman had pushed for riskier investments that now looked suspiciously self-serving. In the afternoon, Presley's brother arrived unexpectedly from Los Angeles carrying a bottle of scotch and the weight of family expectations. He hugged Presley tightly, then shook Ivy's hand with genuine warmth, the first male relative to do so without reservation. "Dad is being an ass," he said, pouring 3 glasses. "But Mom is starting to crack. She asked me to tell you that she misses you." Presley took a sip, letting the burn steady her nerves. "Misses me, or misses the version of me that fit the picture?" Her brother shrugged. "Both probably. But blood is blood." Ivy excused herself to take a work call, leaving the siblings alone. And for the first time Presley spoke openly about the years of hiding, the fear of disappointing the family that had invested so much in her success. Her brother listened without interruption, then said, "I am proud of you for choosing love over the lie." The words healed something small but important, and when he left, Presley felt lighter than she had in weeks. That night Ivy and Presley walked along the Embarcadero, the city lights reflecting on the water like scattered diamonds. They held hands openly for the first time in public, and the simple act felt revolutionary. A group of young women passed them, and one offered a quiet thumbs up, the small gesture carrying more power than any corporate apology could. Back at the loft they made plans for the future, tentative ones that included selling the loft if necessary, and starting a smaller consulting firm together. Ivy admitted that freezing the accounts had risked her own license, but that the risk was worth it to prevent greater harm. Presley kissed her, then deeper and slower, until the world narrowed to just the two of them and the promise they had made in Napa. The next day the board filed a lawsuit against Ivy for breach of fiduciary duty, and Presley for conspiracy. The papers arrived via courier, and the language was vicious, accusing them of orchestrating the entire scandal for personal gain. Ivy read the complaint aloud, her voice steady but her hand trembling slightly. "We will countersue," she said. "For discrimination, for wrongful termination, for every ounce of pain they caused." Presley nodded, though doubt gnawed at her edges. "What if we lose everything?" Ivy set the papers down and took her face in both hands. "Then we still have each other, and that is more than most people ever get." The words anchored her, and they spent the evening preparing the countersuit, adding personal statements about the prejudice they had faced from the first leaked photo to the boardroom ambush. A surprise visit from Ivy's mother shifted the dynamic again. The retired judge arrived with a homemade lasagna and a willingness to listen that had been absent for years. Over dinner she asked questions about the relationship, the real questions about love and commitment and sacrifice. When Ivy described the moment she had decided to freeze the accounts, her mother nodded slowly. You did what any good lawyer would do to protect the innocent." The approval meant more than either woman admitted, and after she left, Ivy cried in Presley's arms, the release of years of unspoken tension. They fell asleep that night with the countersuit draft on the nightstand, a symbol of the fight they refused to abandon. The media storm intensified, with talk shows debating whether corporate America was ready for openly lesbian leaders, and social media split into camps, some calling Presley a trailblazer, others labeling the couple opportunists. Through it all, Presley and Ivy became each other's shield, attending strategy meetings, holding press briefings, and stealing moments of normalcy like grocery shopping at midnight to avoid recognition. The cost was evident in the dark circles under their eyes, and the way they clung to each other in quiet moments, but the bond deepened with every shared battle. When a major investor reached out offering to buy out the frozen assets at a discount, Presley and Ivy discussed it for hours, weighing the financial security against the principle of seeing the investigation through. In the end, they refused, choosing justice over easy money, and the decision felt like the first real victory in weeks. As the week drew to a close, the SEC announced formal charges against 2 board members, and the narrative shifted once more. Reporters who had once hounded them now sought interviews about resilience and authenticity. Presley stood on the balcony one evening watching the fog roll in and realized that the woman she had become through this ordeal was stronger than the CEO she had been. Ivy joined her, wrapping arms around her waist, and together they faced the uncertain future, knowing that whatever came next they would face it as equals, partners and wives who had paid the price and found it worth every penny. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and nervous sweat. Presley sat in the gallery watching Ivy argue the countersuit with a precision that made the judge lean forward and the opposing counsel shift uncomfortably. Every word Ivy spoke carried the weight of their shared story: the discrimination, the family rejection, the corporate betrayal, and when she presented the evidence of the shell accounts, the room went still. Presley felt pride swell in her chest, mixed with the ache of knowing how much Ivy had risked her own career for this moment. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge called a recess and Ivy joined her in the hallway, pulling her into a quick hug. "We are winning," she whispered. Presley nodded, but the victory tasted bittersweet, because winning meant the company she had built would likely be dismantled in the process. They grabbed coffee from a cart outside the courthouse and sat on a bench watching pigeons scatter across the plaza. Ivy checked her phone and sighed. "My firm just sent a formal warning. One more high-profile case like this and they may ask me to take a leave." Presley reached for her hand. "Then we start our own practice. No more hiding, no more answering to anyone but each other." Ivy smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "I love the idea, but I also love the work I do, the cases that help people. Losing that would hurt almost as much as losing you." The honesty opened a new layer of conversation, and they talked about the trade-offs they had each made, the promotions passed over, the friendships strained, the dreams deferred. By the time they returned to the courtroom, both women felt clearer about what truly mattered. The afternoon session brought the chairman to the stand, and under Ivy's cross-examination, he crumbled, admitting that Presley's marriage had been the catalyst, but that the financial irregularities had been ongoing for years. The admission sent shockwaves through the financial community, and by evening the stock, which had been frozen anyway, was the subject of every business broadcast. Back at the loft, they celebrated with takeout and a bottle of the same Cabernet from their first date. Sarah joined them, bringing flowers and a bottle of sparkling cider, and the 3 women toasted to resilience and truth. Sarah shared stories of the remaining staff who had started a petition to reinstate Presley, and the gesture brought tears to her eyes. Later that night, after Sarah left, Ivy and Presley lay in bed talking about the future children, perhaps adoption or surrogacy, a house with a yard away from the city lights. The conversation felt like healing, and when they made love, it was with a tenderness that spoke of survival and gratitude. The next morning brought news that the board had offered a settlement substantial enough to cover legal fees and provide a cushion for whatever came next. Ivy reviewed the terms over breakfast, her pen marking changes with the focus that had first captivated Presley. They accepted with modifications that included a public apology and the dropping of all charges against Ivy. The signing happened in a neutral conference room, and when the papers were done, Presley felt a chapter close with both relief and grief. The following weeks blurred into a new rhythm. Presley began consulting for smaller startups, helping women founders navigate the same biases she had faced. Ivy took on pro bono cases for LGBTQ youth facing family rejection, and the work filled the space left by Nova Dynamics. They attended family therapy together at Presley's mother's insistence, and slowly bridges began to rebuild, one careful conversation at a time. The social prejudice did not vanish overnight. Hateful comments still appeared online, and old colleagues crossed the street to avoid them, but the couple learned to let the noise fade into background static. One weekend they drove to Napa, revisiting the vineyard where they had married, and renewed their vows in a private ceremony attended only by Sarah and Iva's mother. The simple words spoken under the same string lights felt like coming home. Yet the internal conflicts lingered. Presley woke some nights haunted by the empire she had lost, wondering if authenticity had been too expensive a price. Ivy wrestled with guilt over the freeze that had paralyzed innocent employees, even as it exposed corruption. They talked through the doubts in long walks and late-night kitchen conversations, until the guilt transformed into lessons about balance and boundaries. A breakthrough came when Presley received an offer to join the board of a nonprofit focused on women in tech, and Ivy encouraged her to accept, reminding her that influence could come in many forms. The acceptance marked a new beginning, and Presley threw herself into the role, with the same passion that had built Nova Dynamics. As months passed, the media moved on to newer scandals, and the couple found peace in the quiet life they had carved. They adopted a rescue dog named Justice and laughed about the irony every time he stole a sock. Family dinners became regular events, with Presley's brother bringing his new girlfriend and Iva's mother sharing stories from her judging days. The prejudice that had once threatened to tear them apart became the foundation of their strength, teaching them resilience and the value of chosen family. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Ivy turned to Presley and said, "I would freeze 1,000 accounts if it meant keeping you safe." Presley kissed her softly and replied, "And I would lose 1,000 companies if it meant keeping you." The words sealed a promise deeper than any contract. The story of their fight spread through industry circles, inspiring other women to come out and demand better. Podcasts interviewed them, books were proposed, and slowly the narrative shifted from scandal to triumph. Yet they remained grounded, choosing small joys over public acclaim. When the final court documents arrived clearing both their names, they celebrated with a quiet dinner at home, and a toast to the future they had fought to claim. The journey had cost them careers, relationships, and peace of mind, but it had given them something priceless, an unshakable bond forged in fire and love. As they fell asleep that night, tangled together, Presley whispered a thank you to the universe for the woman beside her, and for the strength to choose correctly even when the choice hurt. The final hearing lasted less than an hour. The judge read the settlement terms, allowed the public apology from the remaining board members, the financial restitution, and the permanent injunction against any further retaliation. When the gavel fell for the last time, Presley and Ivy stood together in the courtroom, the weight of months of battle lifting like fog burning off the bay. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters waited, but the couple offered only a brief statement thanking their supporters and affirming their commitment to each other. Then they walked away hand in hand, leaving the cameras behind. Back at the loft, they packed a suitcase for a long overdue honeymoon in Maui, choosing simplicity over luxury. The flight felt like freedom, and when they landed, the warm air and ocean breeze washed away the last traces of tension. They spent days walking beaches, talking about everything and nothing, building sandcastles like children, and making love under stars that felt close enough to touch. Ivy confessed the night she had doubted her decision to freeze the accounts, and Presley admitted the moments she had resented the cost of their openness. Each confession brought them closer until the past felt like a story they could tell without pain. On the last night of the trip, they sat on the lanai watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Ivy pulled a small box from her pocket and opened it to reveal 2 new bands engraved with the date of their wedding and the words "Through Every Storm." Presley slipped one on her finger, and then did the same for Ivy, the gesture simple yet profound. They renewed their vows again, this time with the ocean as witness, and the promise felt unbreakable. The return to San Francisco brought new opportunities. Ivy joined a firm specializing in corporate ethics, and Presley launched a mentorship program for young LGBTQ entrepreneurs. The work fulfilled them in ways the old company never had because it aligned with who they had become. Family dynamics continued to evolve. Presley's father sent a handwritten letter expressing regret and a tentative invitation to dinner. They accepted, and the evening passed with careful conversation and the first real hug in years. Iva's mother became a regular presence, offering legal advice and grandmotherly wisdom, even though no grandchildren had arrived yet. The couple began exploring adoption options, and the process, though slow, brought excitement and hope. Sarah remained a constant friend, eventually joining Presley's mentorship program as a coordinator, and the three women built a support network that extended to dozens of others facing similar battles. 1 year after the ousting, they attended the annual tech conference where Presley had once been keynote speaker. This time she spoke not as CEO, but as advocate, sharing their story with honesty and humor. The standing ovation that followed felt like validation, but the real reward came later when young women approached them backstage, sharing how the example had given them courage. Ivy stood beside her through every conversation, her presence a quiet anchor. That night in their hotel room they reflected on the journey, the losses and the gains, and agreed that the price, though steep, had been worth it. Life settled into a rhythm of purpose and joy. They bought a house in the hills with a garden where Justice the dog could run free. Evenings were spent cooking together, hosting friends, and planning for the family they hoped to grow. The societal prejudice still surfaced occasionally in subtle ways, but they faced it with the strength of experience and the shield of their love. When a major publication named them among the most influential couples in business, they laughed and framed the article as a reminder of how far they had come. As another anniversary approached, Presley and Ivy planned a quiet celebration at the Napa Vineyard where it had all begun. They walked the same paths under string lights and stopped at the spot where Ivy had proposed. Looking back at the road they had traveled, Presley felt gratitude for every tear, every fight, and every choice that had led them here. Ivy took her hand and said, "We paid the price, but we kept what mattered." The statement summed up their story perfectly. When love and ambition collide this violently, was Ivy right to betray the company to save her wife, or did she destroy everything worth fighting for? What choice would you make?